The trailer jackknifed on Miller's Creek Road at exactly 3:47 p.m., sending cafe equipment tumbling across wet asphalt like oversized dice. Neil Dawes rolled hard against the metal wall, his shoulders screaming as steam hissed from the twisted chassis. Through the shattered rear window, he watched his wife's BMW speed away without even slowing down. Blood trickled from his temple as he crawled toward the scattered paperwork that had drawn him into this death trap in the first place. His fingers closed around a manila folder marked Ransley Investment Group, just as sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, beneath forged loan applications bearing his electronic signature, lay a pregnancy test strip. Positive. The handwritten note made his stomach drop. E. Dawes, father. Due March 15th. Sir, don't move. The paramedic's voice seemed to come from underwater. Neil clutched the folder against his chest, his mind racing through 10 years of marriage, family dinners, and quiet Sunday mornings that suddenly felt like elaborate lies. 3 hours later, Neil sat in his kitchen with butterfly bandages across his forehead, staring at the anniversary cake Corinne had bought that morning. She'd written, "Happy 10 years" in careful script across vanilla frosting. The irony tasted bitter as copper. "You're hurt." Corinne appeared in the doorway, her voice carefully neutral. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one that made her eyes look like deep water. "The hospital called me. I'm fine." Neil set the folder on the granite countertop between them, like evidence in a trial. "Found something interesting in that trailer?" Corinne's face went perfectly still. For 10 years, Neil had thought that composure was strength. Now, he recognized it as calculation. "We need to talk," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I was going to wait until dinner, but since you've already seen Eli's baby." The words came out flat, emotionless. Neil had learned long ago that showing feelings at the credit union made people uncomfortable. Apparently, it worked at home too. "It's complicated." Corinne folded her hands like she was chairing a board meeting. "What matters is family. What matters is doing the right thing." "The right thing." Neil repeated the phrase slowly, testing its weight. "Explain that to me." Corinne leaned forward, her expression softening into the smile that had convinced him to propose on their second date. "Eli made a mistake. We both did. But walking away from this child, that's not who we are, Neil. That's not who you are." The kitchen clock ticked 17 seconds before Neil responded. "You want me to raise another man's child?" "My brother's child. I want us to be a family." She reached across the table, her fingers barely brushing his wrist. "Eli's agreed to step back. The Ransleys think this could actually strengthen our business partnership. A stable home, loving parents. The Ransleys know." Something flickered behind Corinne's eyes. "Terrence and Mia have been incredible through all this. They've helped me think through the logistics, the financial planning. They understand family dynamics from their own." "How long?" "Neil, how long have you been planning this conversation? How long have you been meeting with them about my life?" Neil's voice stayed level, but his pulse hammered against his temples. "How long has everyone known except me?" Corinne's composure cracked slightly. 6 weeks since I found out about the pregnancy." 6 weeks? Neil nodded slowly. "And you've been coming home every night, making dinner, asking about my day at the credit union, kissing me goodbye every morning. Because I love you." The words came out desperate now. "Because this doesn't change us." Neil stood up carefully, testing his balance. The concussion made the room tilt slightly, but his thinking felt crystal clear for the first time in months. "I need some air. We haven't finished talking." "Yes, we have." He picked up the folder and walked toward the front door. "I'll be at my mother's tonight. Need to check on her anyway." Corinne's voice followed him into the hallway. "Neil, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Harder than what, exactly?" "Harder than finding out my wife's pregnant with my brother's child. Harder than discovering my own savings have been pledged as collateral for businesses I've never heard of? Or harder than realizing everyone I trust has been lying to me for 6 weeks?" The silence stretched until Neil opened the door and stepped into the October evening. Behind him, he heard Corinne's chair scrape against the kitchen tiles, but she didn't follow him outside. His mother's house sat 15 minutes away in the older part of Evansburg, where maple trees dropped leaves like orange confetti across cracked sidewalks. Margaret Dawes had lived there for 43 years. Through his father's passing, Eli's teenage disasters, and Neil's quiet successes. The porch light was already on when he pulled into the driveway. "You look terrible," she said, studying his bandaged forehead through the screen door. "Come in before the neighbors start gossiping." The living room smelled like eucalyptus and old furniture polish. His mother settled into her favorite armchair, the one positioned to watch both the television and the front window. At 72, Margaret Dawes missed very little. "Corinne called," she said without preamble. "Told me about the baby." Neil sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "What else did she tell you?" "Enough!" His mother's voice carried the flat authority that had kept two sons in line for decades. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know yet." Margaret studied him with the intensity she usually reserved for crossword puzzles. "Your father would have thrown Eli through a window by now." Dad was impulsive. Your father was passionate. There's a difference. She leaned forward, her arthritic hands folded over her knees. "You've always been the careful one, Neil. The one who thinks everything through, but sometimes thinking isn't enough." Neil pulled the folder from his jacket and spread the documents across the coffee table. "Look at this." His mother examined the papers with the methodical attention she'd once brought to balancing the church finances. After several minutes, she sat back with a heavy sigh. "They've been busy," she said finally. "The loan applications are forged. My signature, but not my handwriting. They've been using my position at the credit union to guarantee investments I never approved." Neil pointed to a series of numbers scrawled in the margins. "If those cafe deals go bad, I'm liable for $200,000. And if you divorce Corinne, she gets half of everything, including the house." Neil rubbed his temples, feeling the concussion throb behind his eyes. "They've thought this through very carefully." Margaret rose slowly and walked to the kitchen. She returned with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of cookies that had seen better days. "Your father used to say that every problem had a solution. You just had to be patient enough to find it. Some problems don't have solutions, Mom. Some problems just have consequences. Then you choose which consequences you can live with." She handed him a coffee cup that read, "World's Best Dad" in faded letters. "But don't choose too quickly." That night, Neil lay awake in his childhood bedroom, staring at glow-in-the-dark stars Eli had stuck to the ceiling 20 years earlier. Down the hall, his mother's television murmured with late-night infomercials about miracle cures and financial freedom. He thought about Corinne sleeping in their king-size bed, her hand probably resting on her still flat stomach. He thought about Eli wherever he was, probably celebrating his conquest with cheap beer and expensive dreams. By morning, Neil had made his first decision. He drove straight to the credit union and spent 2 hours copying every document that bore his signature, real or forged. Then he opened a safety deposit box at First National across town and locked the originals inside. When his supervisor asked about the bandages on his forehead, Neil explained about the trailer accident and took 2 personal days to recover. Instead of going home, he drove to the Sunrise Cafe on Elm Street, where Mia Ransley's former assistant manager was working the lunch shift. Katie Morrison was 19, saving money for community college, and happy to talk about her previous job once Neil bought her a sandwich and expressed interest in the food service industry. Mrs. Ransley was okay to work for, Katie said, picking at her turkey club. Demanding but fair, she knew what she wanted. "What about the expansion plans? Must be exciting to be part of a growing business." Katie's expression shifted slightly. "I guess, though some of the investors seemed kind of sketchy." "Sketchy how?" "Well, there was this one guy who came in a lot. Real estate agent, I think. He'd meet with Mrs. Ransley in the back office, and they'd always be arguing about money. She'd get really tense afterward." Neil kept his voice casual. "Real estate can be stressful." "Yeah, but this guy, he was always talking about cutting corners on the inspections, stuff like that. Made me nervous." Katie glanced around the cafe, then leaned closer. "Plus, Mrs. Ransley fired me right after I mentioned it to one of the other employees. Said it was budget cuts, but she hired someone else the next week. That's rough. The weird thing was, the new girl was making more money than me. I saw her pay stub by accident." Katie shrugged. "Mrs. Ransley said I was imagining things, but numbers don't lie, you know." Neil nodded sympathetically and left a generous tip. Numbers definitely didn't lie. Over the next week, he developed a routine. Mornings at the credit union, performing his duties with the same methodical attention that had earned him 3 promotions in 10 years. Afternoons visiting his mother, helping with groceries and medication schedules. Evenings at the public library, researching Ohio business law and property regulations. Corinne called twice a day, her messages growing increasingly frustrated. The first few were apologetic, then concerned, then demanding. By Thursday, she'd escalated to threats. "This is ridiculous, Neil. You can't just disappear every time we have a difficult conversation. We're adults. We need to work through this." Friday evening, she was waiting in his mother's driveway when he arrived with Chinese takeout. "We need to talk," she said, stepping out of her BMW like she was making an entrance at a business conference. "Not here," Neil replied quietly. "Not around my mother." "Then where? You won't come home. You won't answer my calls." "Tomorrow, noon, downtown park by the gazebo." Neil walked toward the front door, then paused. "Come alone." "Neil? Alone, Corinne, or we don't talk at all." Saturday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that stripped leaves from trees and sent them skittering across empty parking lots. Neil arrived at the park early, choosing a bench with clear sight lines in all directions. Old habits from his Army Reserve training, back when he'd thought military discipline might matter in civilian life. Corinne appeared at exactly noon, wearing a long wool coat and the kind of boots that cost more than most people spent on groceries. She looked beautiful and composed, exactly the way she'd looked on their wedding day. "You've lost weight," she said, settling beside him on the bench. "Haven't been eating much. Neil, I know this is hard. I know you're angry. But we can get through this if we just... Tell me about the Ransleys." The request caught her off guard. "What about them? How did you meet them? When did they become investors in your business?" Corinne's hands tightened around her purse strap. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me." She sighed, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I met Mia at a small business networking event last spring. We clicked immediately, both of us trying to help local restaurants survive the post-COVID economy. She introduced me to Terrence, and they offered to back some of my consulting projects. For a percentage of profits? It's standard business practice, Neil. They provide capital, I provide expertise, everyone benefits. And they suggested using my credit union position to guarantee the loans." Corinne's composure slipped. It's not like that." "Then explain it to me." "Explain how my signature ended up on loan applications I never saw for businesses I never approved." Neil pulled photocopies from his jacket pocket. "Explain how my personal savings account was pledged as collateral for a cafe renovation in Toledo." "You weren't supposed to find out this way." "I wasn't supposed to find out at all." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching joggers navigate the winding paths. Finally, Corinne spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "Everything fell apart so quickly after COVID. Half my clients went out of business, the other half couldn't pay their bills. When Mia and Terrence offered to help, you sold me out. I saved us." The words came out sharp and desperate. "Do you know what we would have lost if I'd let those businesses fail? The house, the cars, everything we've built together. Everything I built. With my credit, my reputation, my steady job while you chased dreams that never quite worked out." Corinne flinched like he'd slapped her. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Neil laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been including me in these decisions. Fair would have been honesty. Fair would have been not sleeping with my brother while you were planning my financial future. The thing with Eli, it was a mistake. One night, when I was stressed about the business, when you were working late..." "One night?" Corinne's silence answered the question. "How many times?" "Neil, please. How many times did you sleep with my brother?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. 6. Maybe 7 times over the past 2 months." She turned to face him fully, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But it's over. He knows it's over. We can still..." Neil stood up slowly, his knees protesting the cold. "Did you plan this conversation with them too? Did Mia and Terrence help you practice what to say? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done being managed." He looked down at his wife of 10 years, memorizing her face. "It means I'm done being the responsible one while everyone else makes decisions about my life." "What are you going to do?" Neil folded the photocopies and put them back in his jacket. "I'm going to think about it." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone on the bench. In his rearview mirror, he watched her pull out her phone, probably calling the Ransleys or Eli, probably reporting that Plan A had failed. That evening, Neil sat in his mother's kitchen while she made pot roast and mashed potatoes. The house felt warm and solid, anchored by decades of routine and honest work. His phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Corinne, missed calls from Eli, even a message from Terrence Ransley asking if they could meet to clarify some misunderstandings. "You're plotting something," his mother said, without looking up from the stove. "What makes you say that?" "You've got that expression. Same one you had when you figured out Eli was stealing money from my purse in high school?" She turned to study him with sharp eyes. "Question is, what kind of plotting?" Neil considered lying, then decided his mother deserved better. "The kind that might make you ashamed of me." Margaret Dawes wiped her hands on a dish towel and sat across from him at the small table. "Neil, I've been your mother for 35 years. I've seen you at your best and your worst. The worst was when you let people walk all over you. If you're finally ready to fight back, I'm not going to stop you. Even if fighting back makes me someone you don't recognize, sometimes the people we become are the people we were always meant to be. We just needed the right motivation." On Monday morning, Neil returned to work with a plan. Not the elaborate movie-style revenge fantasies he'd entertained over the weekend, but something simpler and more devastating. He was going to follow every rule, regulation, and legal requirement to the absolute letter. His first stop was the office of Fire Marshal Williams, a methodical man who took building safety as seriously as Neil took financial regulations. Neil brought him coffee and donuts, along with some casual concerns about a cafe renovation he'd heard about through the lending grapevine. "Probably nothing," Neil said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "But I keep hearing rumors about corner cutting on the electrical work. Thought you might want to take a look before someone gets hurt." Marshal Williams was the kind of public servant who'd rather investigate one false alarm than miss one real danger. By Wednesday, he'd shut down 2 of the Ransleys' cafe locations for code violations that would take weeks and thousands of dollars to fix. Neil's second stop was the State Labor Board, where he filed an anonymous complaint about unpaid overtime and improper worker classification at the same locations. He included Katie Morrison's contact information and a note suggesting they might want to interview other former employees. His third stop was the county recorder's office, where he spent an afternoon copying property records and building permits. The Ransleys had been busy, but not always careful. Several of their real estate transactions showed irregularities that would interest the right people. By Friday, Neil felt better than he had in months. Not happy. Happiness seemed like a foreign concept now, but purposeful. He was using his skills, his knowledge, his connections. For the first time in years, he felt like he was in control. That evening, Eli showed up at his mother's house. Neil was washing dishes when he heard voices in the living room, followed by his mother's sharp tone. "You've got some nerve showing up here. I need to talk to Neil." Eli's voice carried the wheedling charm that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. "This family stuff has gone too far." Neil dried his hands and walked into the living room. His brother stood by the front door, wearing an expensive leather jacket and the kind of boots that were meant to look rugged but had never seen real work. At 33, Eli had their father's height and their mother's green eyes, along with a smile that made people want to trust him. "Hello, brother," Eli said. "You look like hell." "You look like success," Neil replied evenly. "New jacket?" "Business has been good." Eli's grin faltered slightly. "Look, we need to clear the air. This whole situation with Corinne—" "You mean the situation where you slept with my wife?" "It wasn't supposed to happen. We were both stressed, both dealing with business pressure." "Stop," Neil's voice cut through the explanation. "I don't want to hear your justifications." "Then what do you want?" Neil looked at his brother for a long moment, remembering the boy who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd stood up to bullies in middle school, who'd been best man at his wedding. That person felt like a stranger now. "I want you to leave my mother's house," Neil said quietly. "Come on, Neil, we're family." "Family doesn't sleep with family's wives." Eli's charm curdled into something uglier. "Family also doesn't abandon pregnant women. That baby is going to need a father." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you decided to make one." "You self-righteous son of a—" Eli stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. "Boys, Margaret Dawes's voice cracked like a whip. Not in my house! Neil held his brother's glare for several seconds, then stepped aside. You know where the door is? Eli looked between Neil and their mother, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This isn't over. Yes, it is. After Eli left, Neil helped his mother to her bedroom and made sure her medications were organized for the week. She seemed frailer than usual, worn down by family drama that had nothing to do with her, but everything to do with the sons she'd raised. I'm sorry about this, Neil said, adjusting her pillows. I'm sorry you have to see us like this. I'm not sorry, she replied firmly. I'm proud of you for standing up to him. Took you long enough. I'm not done standing up to people. Good. Just remember who you're doing it for. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Don't let them turn you into someone you can't live with. That weekend, Neil made his next move. He'd spent Friday evening researching the Ransleys' financial structure, tracing connections between their various business entities and investment funds. What he found was a web of interconnected loans and partnerships that looked impressive on paper, but relied heavily on projected profits that hadn't materialized. On Saturday morning, he drove to the office building where Terrence Ransley leased space for his investment company. The directory in the lobby listed Ransley Capital Management on the third floor, between a tax preparation service and a chiropractor's office. The waiting room looked expensive but felt temporary, like a stage set that could be struck at a moment's notice. Leather furniture, abstract art, magazines about success and entrepreneurship. Neil studied a framed photograph of the Ransleys shaking hands with the mayor at some ribbon-cutting ceremony. Mr. Dawes? A young receptionist smiled brightly. Mr. Ransley will see you now. Terrence Ransley's office occupied a corner of the building, with windows overlooking downtown Evansburg's modest skyline. The man himself was younger than Neil had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of confident handshake that came from years of convincing people to trust him with their money. Neil, great to finally meet you properly. Terrence gestured to a chair across from his desk. Corinne's told us so much about you. I'm sure she has. Coffee? Water? I think we've got some of those energy drinks the kids love. I'm fine. Neil settled into the chair and pulled out a manila folder. I wanted to discuss some concerns about the loan applications. Terrence's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, though I should mention all of our paperwork has been handled through proper channels. Your wife's been very thorough. My wife isn't a loan officer. No, but she's got excellent business instincts. And your backing gives her credibility with lenders. Terrence leaned back in his chair, projecting casual confidence. Look, I understand this situation with the pregnancy is complicated. But from a business perspective, you're positioned to benefit significantly from our partnership. Explain that to me. The cafe industry is poised for massive growth. People are craving authentic local experiences after years of corporate chains and delivery apps. Our model provides exactly that. Community-focused establishments with proven operational systems and solid financial backing. Neil nodded thoughtfully. What's your default rate? Excuse me? Your default rate. What percentage of your cafe investments fail to meet projected returns? Terrence's confidence wavered. Well, the industry is always evolving. It's a simple question. Of the 12 cafes you've invested in over the past 18 months, how many are currently profitable? Profitability isn't always the best metric in the short term. 3, Neil said quietly. 3 out of 12 are showing positive cash flow. 5 have closed permanently. The others are operating at a loss. Where did you get those numbers? Neil placed photocopied financial statements on the desk. Public records, loan applications, tax filings. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Terrence's face had gone pale. What do you want? I want my name removed from all current and future loan applications. I want my personal assets released from any collateral agreements. And I want documentation that my wife entered into these arrangements without my knowledge or consent. That could be complicated. Then, uncomplicate it. Neil stood up slowly. You have until end of business Wednesday. After that, I'll be discussing these irregularities with some people who might find them very interesting. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. Neil walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Terrence? You might want to double-check your fire safety inspections. I hear the marshal's been extra thorough lately. Neil left the building feeling energized in a way he hadn't experienced since his Army Reserve days. There was something deeply satisfying about taking action after months of being managed by other people's decisions. That afternoon, he drove to Eli's apartment complex on the south side of town. His brother lived in a renovated warehouse that had been converted into lofts for young professionals who wanted to feel urban in a decidedly non-urban place. The parking lot was full of expensive cars and motorcycles, toys bought with money that should have gone toward retirement funds and emergency savings. Eli answered the door wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, looking like he'd just woken up despite it being nearly 3 p.m. Neil. His surprise seemed genuine. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." "I thought we covered everything at Mom's house." "Not everything." Neil pushed past his brother into the apartment. "Not the part about the real estate deals." The loft was exactly what Neil had expected. Exposed brick walls, stainless steel appliances, furniture that looked uncomfortable but expensive. The kind of place designed to impress visitors rather than create a home. "What real estate deals?" Eli closed the door, but didn't move away from it. "The ones where you've been flipping properties using forged loan applications." "The ones where you've been listing me as a co-signer without my knowledge." Neil pulled out another folder. "The ones that are about to get you arrested for fraud." Eli's casual demeanor evaporated. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you've purchased 4 properties in the past 6 months using falsified income statements. I know you've been using my credit history to secure financing for renovations that never happened. And I know you've been selling those properties to shell companies owned by the Ransleys at inflated prices. Prove it." Neil spread documents across Eli's granite coffee table. Bank records, property transfers, inspection reports. Construction permits that were never pulled. "It's all here." Eli studied the papers, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and fear. "How did you get all this?" "I'm good at my job. I understand how money moves, how systems work, how people hide things." Neil gathered the documents back into the folder. "What I don't understand is why you thought you could hide it from me." "I wasn't hiding anything from you. I was protecting you by forging my signature, by using my reputation as collateral for your schemes, by making sure you profited from deals you were too careful to make yourself." Eli's voice rose, frustration breaking through. "Do you know how much money you've left on the table over the years? How many opportunities you've passed up because you were afraid to take risks? Smart risks, legal risks, boring risks, safe risks that never amount to anything." Eli began pacing the small living room. "When Corinne told me about the business opportunities, about what she was trying to build, I saw a chance to finally do something big. Something that would set all of us up for life. So you decided to steal from me to make it happen. I decided to include you in something profitable. Whether you were smart enough to see it or not." Neil felt something cold settle in his chest, like ice water replacing blood. "Include me." "Yeah, as a partner. As family. As a sufferer." They stared at each other across the expensive furniture and exposed brick walls. In the silence, Neil could hear traffic from the street below, the distant sound of people living normal lives with normal problems. "This ends now," Neil said finally. "What ends?" "All of it. The forged signatures, the property deals, the partnership with the Ransleys, all of it stops today." Eli laughed, but it sounded forced. "You can't just make business relationships disappear, Neil. There are contracts, obligations. There are also laws, and law enforcement agencies that investigate violations of those laws." Neil walked toward the door. "You have until Wednesday to unwind whatever deals you can unwind. After that, other people will be asking questions I can't control." "Wait!" Eli's voice carried a note of panic. "Wait, we can work this out." "Brothers don't send brothers to prison." Neil paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Brothers don't sleep with brothers' wives either, but here we are." "Neil, please." "Wednesday, Eli." "End of business!" Neil left his brother's apartment feeling exhausted rather than triumphant. The satisfaction of taking action was being replaced by something darker, a cold emptiness that made him question whether he was fixing problems or creating new ones. Monday brought news that the State Labor Board had launched a formal investigation into the Ransleys' employment practices. Tuesday brought a visit from Fire Marshal Williams, who thanked Neil for the tip about the electrical problems and mentioned that the investigation had expanded to include building permit irregularities. Wednesday brought Corinne to the credit union. Neil was reviewing loan applications when she appeared in his office doorway, looking composed and professional in a gray business suit. Her pregnancy wasn't showing yet, but she carried herself differently, with the careful posture of someone protecting something fragile. "We need to talk," she said. "Close the door." She sat in the chair across from his desk, the same spot where hundreds of loan applicants had nervously presented their financial dreams and desperations. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Terrence called me," she said without preamble. "He said you threatened him. I informed him about some irregularities in his business practices. If he interpreted that as a threat, maybe he has a guilty conscience. Neil, please. Let's stop playing games." Corinne leaned forward, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult clients. "I know you're angry. I know you feel betrayed. But destroying everything we've built together isn't going to fix anything. We didn't build this together. You built it using my name, my credit, my reputation, without my knowledge or consent. I was trying to protect you from having to make difficult decisions. You were trying to protect yourself from having to ask permission." They sat in silence while Neil's computer hummed and fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Through his office window, he could see downtown Evansburg going about its business. People walking to lunch, parking meters expiring, life continuing despite the personal drama playing out in small offices and conference rooms. "What do you want?" Corinne asked finally. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Corinne's composure finally cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "Because of the baby? Because of the lies. Because of the schemes. Because of 10 years of marriage where I thought we were partners, and you thought I was a resource to be managed? That's not fair. Fair stopped being relevant 6 weeks ago." Neil opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "I've already consulted with an attorney. You should probably do the same." Corinne took the card with shaking hands. "What about the baby? What about it? It's going to need a father. Then Eli better start acting like one." "Neil, please." "I'm done, Corinne. I'm done being the responsible one while everyone else makes decisions about my life. I'm done pretending this marriage was ever what I thought it was." She stood up slowly, her professional composure returning like armor. "You'll regret this." "Maybe. But I won't regret it as much as I regret the last 10 years. After she left, Neil sat alone in his office for a long time, watching shadows move across his desk as the afternoon sun shifted. He'd crossed a line today, said things that couldn't be unsaid. There was no going back to the man he'd been a month ago, the man who trusted people and believed in good intentions. That evening, he found Eli waiting by his car in the credit union parking lot. "We need to talk," his brother said. "I thought we covered everything." "Not everything. Not the part where you're trying to destroy my life." Neil unlocked his car and threw his briefcase into the back seat. "Your life was already destroyed. I'm just making it visible. I can't go to prison, Neil. I won't survive in there." "Then you should have thought about that before you started committing crimes." Eli grabbed Neil's arm as he tried to get into the car. "I'm your brother." "No." Neil pulled free, his voice deadly quiet. "Brothers don't betray each other. Brothers don't steal from each other. Brothers don't sleep with each other's wives." He looked directly into Eli's eyes. "You're just someone who shares my DNA." "Neil, please, get away from my car. I'll tell people about your revenge scheme, about how you're destroying businesses, ruining lives. Tell them." Neil got behind the wheel and started the engine. "Tell them about the loan officer who discovered fraud and reported it to the proper authorities. Tell them about the husband who found out his wife was stealing from him and filed for divorce. See how much sympathy you get." He drove away, leaving Eli standing alone under the parking lot lights. Friday brought the consequences Neil had been orchestrating. The labor board announced fines and penalties that would cost the Ransleys nearly $50,000. The fire marshal's investigation had expanded to include the city building inspector, who'd discovered that several permits had been issued without proper engineering reviews. 2 more cafe locations were shut down pending safety upgrades. Most satisfying of all, the county prosecutor's office had opened a preliminary investigation into real estate fraud based on anonymous tips about falsified loan documents. Neil spent Saturday afternoon helping his mother with yard work, raking leaves and preparing her garden for winter. The physical labor felt good after weeks of paperwork and phone calls. His mother worked beside him, moving slowly but steadily, occasionally pausing to rest on the porch steps. "You've been quiet today," she observed, watching him bag the last of the maple leaves. "Just thinking. About what comes next?" Neil leaned the rake against the garage wall and sat beside her on the steps. "About whether I'm becoming someone I can live with." "What do you mean?" "I've destroyed 3 businesses, ruined 2 people's financial futures, and probably sent my brother to prison. And the strangest part is, I feel good about it." Margaret studied her son's profile in the late afternoon light. "Do you feel guilty about feeling good?" "Shouldn't I?" "Depends. Are you enjoying their pain, or are you enjoying justice?" Neil considered the question carefully. "I'm enjoying control. For the first time in years, I'm the one making decisions instead of having decisions made for me." "Then you're not the monster you're afraid of becoming. Monsters enjoy suffering. You're enjoying competence." That evening, Neil's phone rang while he was making dinner for himself and his mother. The number wasn't familiar, but the voice was. "This is Mia Ransley," the caller said without preamble. "We need to meet." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do, tonight. The Riverside Diner on Highway 6, 9 o'clock. And if I don't come, then you'll miss your chance to end this before it gets worse for everyone." The line went dead. Neil stared at his phone for several seconds, then checked the time. 7:30. If he was going to meet Mia Ransley, he'd need to leave soon. "Trouble?" his mother asked from the kitchen table. "Maybe. I need to go out for a while." "Be careful. Desperate people do desperate things." The Riverside Diner sat on the edge of town, a 1950s-style establishment that served truckers and insomniacs with equal dedication. Neil arrived 5 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner, positioning himself where he could see both the entrance and the exit. Mia Ransley walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, scanning the restaurant until she spotted him. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of professional polish that came from years of convincing people to trust her with their money. She wore jeans and a leather jacket, but they looked expensive. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I haven't decided whether this was smart or stupid. Probably both." She signaled the waitress for coffee. "But necessary." "What do you want?" "I want to understand what you're trying to accomplish." Neil studied her face, looking for tells. "I'm trying to clean up the mess other people made of my life. By destroying innocent businesses, by putting people out of work, by stopping fraud, by preventing more people from being victimized by schemes they don't understand." Mia's coffee arrived, and she wrapped her hands around the mug like she was cold. "The people working in those cafes aren't scheming. They're just trying to make a living. Then they should find employers who don't commit crimes." "Is that what you think we are? Criminals?" Neil leaned back in the booth. "I think you're people who got in over your heads and decided other people's money was an acceptable solution to your problems. We were trying to build something. Create jobs, serve communities. You were trying to get rich quick using other people's credit and other people's reputations. When that started falling apart, you involved my wife and my brother to cover your losses." Mia sipped her coffee and looked out the window at the nearly empty parking lot. "What if I told you we could make this right? Pay back the money, clean up the paperwork, make sure everyone's whole. With what money? We have investors, real investors, with legitimate funding. Then why didn't you use them in the first place? Because real investors ask hard questions. They want detailed business plans, market analysis, proof of concept. They want to see success before they fund expansion. So, you decided to fake success using forged documents. We decided to bootstrap our way to real success using available resources." Neil laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Available resources? Is that what you call stealing? We call it creative financing. The prosecutor's office will call it fraud." Mia's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Those charges won't just affect Terrence and me. They'll affect Corinne, too. She signed documents, transferred funds, made representations to lenders. In the eyes of the law, she's as guilty as anyone. Then she should have thought about that before she forged my signature. She was trying to save her business. Trying to build something for your future together." She was trying to use my reputation to cover her mistakes. There's a difference. Mia leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. What if she goes to prison? What about the baby? Neil felt something cold twist in his stomach. He'd been so focused on Corinne's betrayal that he hadn't fully considered the legal consequences she might face. Fraud charges could mean years in prison, especially if prosecutors decided to make an example. That's her problem now, he said. But the words felt hollow. Is it? Because that baby is going to be your niece or nephew. Are you really okay with a child growing up knowing their mother's in prison because their uncle wanted revenge? Their mother's in legal trouble because she committed crimes. I didn't force her to forge signatures or falsify loan applications. But you're the one pushing for prosecution instead of resolution. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds coming from the kitchen and the highway outside. Neil thought about the pregnancy test he'd found in the trailer, about Corinne's hand resting on her stomach, about a child who hadn't asked to be part of this mess. What kind of resolution? He asked finally. Full restitution. Every penny paid back with interest. All forged documents corrected or voided. Complete dissolution of our business relationship with Corinne. And a public apology acknowledging that mistakes were made. In exchange for what? You call off the investigations. You stop feeding information to prosecutors. You let us clean this up quietly. Neil considered the offer. It was reasonable, maybe even generous. It would give him everything he'd wanted, except the satisfaction of watching his enemies face criminal consequences. And Eli? What about him? Does this deal include my brother? Mia hesitated. The real estate transactions are more complicated. Some of those properties have already been sold. Money has already changed hands. Unwinding those deals would take months and might not be possible. So Eli faces charges while you and Corinne walk away. I'm trying to save as many people as possible. Neil finished his coffee and stood up. I'll think about it. How long? Until I decide. He left Mia sitting in the booth and drove home through empty streets. His mother was already asleep, her television murmuring quietly in the background. Neil sat in the kitchen with a beer and thought about choices and consequences, and the difference between justice and revenge. By Sunday morning, he'd made his decision. He called the county prosecutor's office and spoke to Detective Sarah Chen, the investigator handling the fraud case. They met that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, away from official buildings and formal procedures. I need to clarify some things about my complaint, Neil said. Detective Chen was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of sharp attention that came from years of separating truth from lies. What kind of clarification? I want to make sure you understand that my wife was a sufferer in this scheme, not a perpetrator. Based on the evidence you provided, Mrs. Dawes signed numerous documents and transferred significant funds. That suggests active participation. That suggests manipulation by more experienced criminals. Neil pulled out a folder he'd prepared. I've documented the timeline of events. The Ransleys approached my wife when her business was failing. They offered her financing in exchange for access to my credit union position. When she hesitated, they brought in my brother to pressure her. Pressure her how? By seducing her. By making her feel like she was part of an exclusive opportunity. By convincing her that she was protecting our financial future. Neil handed over the documents. She made terrible decisions, but she made them under duress and false pretenses. Detective Chen reviewed the papers carefully. This changes some things, but not everything. She still participated in fraud, regardless of motivation. What if she cooperated fully with your investigation? What if she provided testimony against the primary perpetrators? That would certainly be taken into consideration during any plea negotiations. And what about immunity in exchange for cooperation? That would depend on the extent of her cooperation and the value of her testimony. Neil nodded slowly. I think you'll find she has a lot to offer. That evening he called Corinne. We need to meet, he said when she answered. Where? Your choice. But come alone. An hour later, they sat in Corinne's BMW in the parking lot of the grocery store where they'd shopped together for 10 years. The space felt smaller than Neil remembered, filled with the weight of everything they'd said and everything they couldn't take back. I spoke to Detective Chen today, Neil said without preamble. Corinne's face went pale. What did you tell her? I told her you were a sufferer. I told her the Ransleys manipulated you into participating in their scheme. Why would you do that? Because it's true. And because that baby deserves a mother who's not in prison. Corinne began crying, tears streaming down her face without sound. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for all of it. I know. Can you forgive me? Neil looked at his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something he hadn't expected. Pity. She'd made terrible choices, betrayed him in the worst possible ways. But she'd also been used by people who understood her weaknesses better than she did. I can't forgive you, he said quietly. But I don't want to destroy you either. What happens now? Now you call Detective Chen and tell her everything. Every meeting with the Ransleys, every document you signed, every decision they pressured you into. You cooperate completely, and maybe you avoid prison. And then, we get divorced and you raise Eli's child and try to build a life that doesn't involve lying to people who trust you. Corinne nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What about Eli? Eli's on his own. He's an adult who made adult choices. He can face adult consequences. He's your brother. No, he's not. Not anymore. They sat in silence until Corinne's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and her expression changed. What is it? Neil asked. It's from Terrence. He says they're leaving town tonight. He wants to meet one last time. Don't go. I have to. There are things I need to get from them, documents that could help with the investigation. Neil studied her face, looking for signs of deception. What kind of documents? Records of their other deals, other people they've scammed. If I'm going to cooperate with the police, I need everything I can get. Where are they? The warehouse district. Building 47, near the rail yards. Neil knew the area, abandoned industrial buildings that had been empty since the factory closures of the 1990s. Not the kind of place for friendly business meetings. I'm coming with you. No. If they see you, they'll run without giving me anything. If they're planning to run anyway, they might not be planning to let you walk away. Corinne's phone buzzed again. She read the message and her face went ashen. What? Neil demanded. Eli's with them. He says if I don't come alone, they'll leave him to face the charges by himself. Let them. I can't. Whatever else he's done, he's the father of my baby. I can't let him go to prison for 20 years. Neil felt the familiar surge of cold anger, but this time it was mixed with something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for the foolish woman sitting beside him who was about to walk into what could be a very dangerous situation. Give me your phone, he said. Why? Because I'm going to track you. And if something goes wrong, I'm calling the police. Corinne handed over her phone reluctantly. Neil activated the location sharing feature and sent the coordinates to his own device. Go, he said. But if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you run. Don't worry about documents or Eli or anyone else. You run. What are you going to do? I'm going to follow you at a distance. Neil, this isn't about us anymore. This isn't about our marriage or your betrayal or my revenge. This is about making sure that baby has a chance to be born. Corinne nodded and started her car. Neil watched her drive away, then waited 2 minutes before following. Building 47 sat at the edge of the warehouse district, a massive concrete structure that had once housed a furniture factory. Neil parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using abandoned buildings and rusted equipment for cover. Through broken windows, he could see lights moving inside the main floor. He circled the building until he found a side door that had been forced open. Inside, the factory was a maze of empty rooms and industrial debris. He followed the sound of voices toward the center of the building, where a small office had been set up with folding tables and battery-powered lights. Through a dirty window, he could see Corinne standing across from Terrence and Mia Ransley. Eli sat in a chair nearby, his face swollen and bruised like he'd been in a fight. The conversation looked tense, with a lot of pointing and raised voices. Neil pulled out his phone and called 911. I need to report a possible abduction, he said quietly. Building 47 in the warehouse district. 4 people inside, 1 appears to be held against his will. He stayed on the line while the dispatcher took details, keeping his eyes on the scene inside. Terrence was pacing now, gesturing angrily at Corinne. Mia stood by the exit like she was ready to run. Suddenly, Eli stood up and lunged at Terrence. The 2 men crashed into the folding table, sending papers flying. Mia screamed something Neil couldn't hear. Corinne backed toward the window where Neil was watching. Then he heard sirens in the distance. The sound galvanized everyone inside. Terrence shoved Eli away and grabbed a box of documents. Mia was already heading for the exit. Corinne stood frozen in the middle of the room, unsure which way to go. Neil burst through the office door. "Corinne, this way!" She turned toward his voice just as Terrence realized they weren't alone. The man's face twisted with rage as he recognized Neil. "You son of a witch! You called the cops! Run!" Neil grabbed Corinne's arm and pulled her toward the side door he'd used to enter the building. Behind them, he could hear Terrence and Mia arguing about what to take and what to leave. Eli was shouting something about not going back to prison. The sirens were getting closer. Neil and Corinne made it outside just as police cars began surrounding the building. Officers with flashlights and drawn weapons moved toward the entrances. Someone with a megaphone was ordering everyone to come out with their hands visible. "Over here," Neil called to the nearest officer. "We're the ones who called it in." The next hour was a blur of statements and questions and paperwork. Terrence and Mia were arrested trying to escape through a back exit. Eli was found in the office, sitting quietly with his hands folded, looking like a man who'd finally accepted his fate. Corinne sat in the back of an ambulance, while a paramedic checked her blood pressure and asked about the pregnancy. Neil stood nearby, watching his wife and his brother and the ruins of everything they'd all built together. Detective Chen approached him as the last of the suspects were loaded into police cars. "Your wife's been very helpful," she said. "Between her testimony and the documents we recovered tonight, we should be able to build strong cases against all the primary perpetrators." "What about Corinne?" "Depends on how helpful she continues to be. But based on what we've learned tonight, I think the prosecutor will be inclined toward leniency." Neil nodded, feeling exhausted. "And Eli? Your brother's looking at serious time. The real estate fraud charges alone could put him away for 10 to 15 years. That's what he chose." Detective Chen studied Neil's expression. Most people would be upset about a family member facing prison. Most people don't have family members who sleep with their wives and steal their identities. Fair point. Neil drove Corinne home that night, the first time he'd been in their house. Since the anniversary dinner that felt like it had happened years ago instead of weeks, everything looked the same but felt different, like a museum exhibit of a life he used to live. "I need to pack some things," Corinne said, standing uncertainly in the living room. "Take whatever you want. I'll be staying at my mother's for a while longer." She went upstairs while Neil sat at the kitchen table where they'd eaten thousands of meals together. The anniversary cake was long gone, but he could still see the ghost of Happy 10 Years written in vanilla frosting. Corinne came back down with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. "The divorce papers," she said. "When do you want to file them?" "My lawyer's handling it. You should receive copies next week." "And the baby?" Neil looked at his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, standing in the doorway with her suitcases and her secrets and her growing belly. "That's between you and Eli. When he gets out of prison, Neil, I know you hate me. I know you have every right to hate me. But someday this child is going to ask questions about their family." "What should I tell them?" Neil considered the question for a long moment. "Tell them their uncle was a man who believed in consequences. Tell them their mother made mistakes, but tried to make them right. And tell them that sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is let them go." Corinne nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "I really did love you." "I know. That's what makes this so sad." She left through the front door, the same door she'd walked through as a bride 10 years earlier. Neil watched her taillights disappear down the street, then sat alone in the house they'd shared, listening to the familiar sounds of settling wood and humming appliances. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Come home when you're ready." Neil looked around the kitchen one last time, memorizing details he'd probably forget. The coffee stain on the counter that Corinne had never been able to remove, the refrigerator magnets from places they'd vacationed together, the small pile of mail addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Neil Dawes. He turned off the lights and locked the door behind him. 6 months later, Neil sat in a different kitchen, in a small apartment across town. The divorce had been finalized in February. Corinne had received probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation with the prosecution. Terrence and Mia Ransley were serving concurrent sentences in federal prison. Eli had been sentenced to 12 years for real estate fraud and identity theft. He'd written Neil one letter from county jail before his transfer to state prison. It was short and angry, full of accusations about family loyalty and betrayal. Neil had read it once and thrown it away. His mother's health had declined over the winter, forcing Neil to make difficult decisions about her care. She was in a nursing facility now, comfortable but fading. He visited her every Tuesday and Thursday, bringing newspapers and updates about people she used to know. "Any word from Corinne?" she asked during one visit. "She had the baby last week." "A girl? What did she name her?" "Grace." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's a good name, strong. The social worker says they're doing well." Corinne found work at a non-profit helping small businesses apply for legitimate loans. Ironic. I thought so too. They sat quietly for a while, watching other families visit their elderly relatives. The nursing home was clean and well-staffed, but it still felt like a waiting room for passing. "Do you regret it?" his mother asked suddenly. "Which part?" "Any of it. All of it." Neil considered the question carefully. "I regret that it happened. I regret that people I trusted betrayed me. I regret that a child will grow up without her father because he's in prison. But do you regret what you did about it? No. I don't regret holding people accountable for their choices, even if it cost you everything." Neil looked at his mother, this woman who'd raised 2 sons and buried a husband and was now facing her own mortality with quiet dignity. "It didn't cost me everything. It cost me illusions. Is that better or worse? It's more honest." That evening, Neil returned to his apartment and made dinner for one. The place was smaller than the house he'd shared with Corinne, but it felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived in years. He'd furnished it simply: a comfortable couch, a dining table for 2, bookshelves filled with novels he'd never had time to read when he was busy being responsible for other people's dreams. His phone rang while he was washing dishes. The number was familiar. Detective Chen. "Mr. Dawes, I thought you'd want to know. We arrested 2 more people today based on information from the Ransley investigation. Turns out your brother and the Ransleys were part of a much larger fraud ring." "How much larger?" "At least 30 sufferers across 3 states, millions of dollars in losses." Neil felt a familiar stirring of cold satisfaction. "Good. The prosecutor wanted me to thank you again. Without your initial complaint, we never would have uncovered the broader scheme. Just doing my civic duty." After Detective Chen hung up, Neil poured himself a glass of wine and sat on his small balcony, watching the sun set over Evansburg. The town looked different from this perspective, smaller but also more manageable, like a problem that had been solved rather than a burden to be carried. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it without reading, then recognized the area code. It was from the nursing facility where Eli was serving his sentence. "I heard about Grace. Thank you for not telling her mother about the investigation. E." Neil stared at the message for several minutes, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations were finished. Some relationships couldn't survive the truth about what people were really capable of doing to each other. He finished his wine as darkness settled over the city. Tomorrow, he would go to work at the credit union, review loan applications, and help honest people make honest decisions about their financial futures. Tomorrow evening, he would visit his mother and read her the newspaper. Tomorrow night, he would come home to his small apartment and cook dinner for one, and feel grateful for the simplicity of a life built on truth instead of illusions. But tonight, Neil Dawes sat alone on his balcony and remembered the man he used to be. The careful, trusting fool who'd believed that family meant something more than shared DNA, and that love could survive any betrayal if you just tried hard enough to forgive. That man was gone. In his place sat someone harder, colder, more honest about human nature and the price of trust. Someone who understood that the worst thing you could do to your enemies wasn't to destroy them. It was to force them to face the consequences of their own choices. Neil raised his empty wine glass in a silent toast to the graves of his former life, then went inside and locked the door behind him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people who thought they could manipulate him, new opportunities to prove that some lessons once learned were never forgotten. He had become the ledger that balanced the books of other people's betrayals. Cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy for those who mistook his patience for weakness. The night was quiet, the apartment was peaceful, and Neil Dawes was finally, completely, alone with the consequences of becoming exactly who his enemies had made him. The end.